welcome back, everyone, to the Unfounded Podcast. My name is Christopher Turner, and I am your host. This is another traditional episode coming at you right now. We are kind of alternating back and forth. There's 2 episodes I'm posting right now every week. One of them is a channeled message, live message that you'll see reposted here from TikTok. If any of you follow me on TikTok at Chris the Sage, I do live channeled messages at minimum once a week. I've been doing them once a week just to kind of get my feet under me to get started. But those live messages are also posted on the podcast here as live channeled messages. So those are available for you. I hope you've been enjoying those. The last one, this last episode was quite the doozy in terms of length. It was like over 4 hours long. So lots of channeled information in there for you. And I hope it was beneficial. I hope you enjoyed it. But like I said, today, the other type of show that we're doing is the more traditional format, this one with the video as well. So those of you that are listening, I recommend downloading the Spotify app, following the podcast on there, because you'll get the video portion of the episode as well, which will be more important moving forward, because as you can see in last week's episode and this one, we're going to have a lot more video content, a lot more content from the internet that I'm going to be engaging with, so that we can spark some conversation and do some deep diving on some contemporary topics that up until this point I've been kind of steering clear from, because I've, as you can tell through the podcast, been doing a lot of healing and awakening. That being said, moving forward, it's going to be much more oriented in the contemporary direction with current events. And today's topic is a very interesting one. It's an odd one. Today's going to be a little bit more just off the bat for anybody that isn't a fan of conspiratorial topics. This is going to be one that is going to fall in that realm for sure. You'll see what I mean as we get into the show a little bit. The topic itself is actually weather modification. And this is as you can tell, a very, very controversial topic, because it's the center of our political debate in terms of climate change. And so I thought it would be a good idea to get on here and to do some research ourselves, and to look into some of the posts and things that I've been finding on TikTok and around the web regarding weather modification, weather change, climate change, all of these kind of topics that are combined into one here. And I want to look into it a little bit more, because I do think that there's something else, at least personally, and you don't have to agree with me on this, but I think that this is one of those unfounded places, the topic of climate change, Earth's climate and weather patterns and global temperature. I believe all of this has become so politicized over the last decade or two that it's nearly impossible to tell what the real truth is. In the modern day, there's so much disinformation and misinformation going around that, and so much compulsion, political compulsion and social compulsion now coming down from the government itself to believe and get on board with kind of the climate change narrative as it's been presented. And the reason I think it's important for us to deep dive this a little bit more is because as a topic becomes more mainstream, it starts to be, like I said, in the way I just hinted at, there's this compulsion that starts to creep in, where we're no longer allowed, or feel like we're allowed, to make up our own minds on topics like climate change. We have to kind of get in line, or it's like get in line or shut up, kind of a feeling that I get around the topic. Specifically, one of the terms you'll find with climate change, that there's specific terminology that's used. And if you start to venture outside of the terms that are used in the political discourse, you'll start to find yourself in a more conspiratorial land. But that doesn't mean the terms themselves are conspiratorial or fake or made up. It just it's part of the narrative that isn't presented. And I want to kind of demonstrate that to you today. Specifically starting with a topic or a subject called benign weather modification. It might be a term that you're not familiar with. It's something that I stumbled upon a couple months ago, and actually did a live TikTok when I found this research that I'm about to show you on benign weather modification. And that was actually a TikTok live that got taken down. You may have listened to the censoring episode that I put up on the podcast, and that was inspired out of the censorship that took place based on that benign weather modification live that I was doing. Very innocent live, again, as you could tell, a more conspiratorial topic, but I don't believe it's conspiratorial because it's untrue. I believe it's conspiratorial because it's kind of radical in some ways and really shakes up the narrative of what's going on around us. So that being said, without further ado, we'll kind of switch up the view here, and I'll read to you a little bit about weather modification to start off, so we got kind of a basis to work from. And then I'll go more specifically into a research paper that I came across, the one specifically I was looking into in that live that got cut off. I want to read a little bit about benign weather modification from that research paper that was published in 1997, and we'll go on from there. There's a ton of topics in today's episode centered on weather modification, climate change, but I'm also going to cover a couple of different, the Hawaii wildfires that took place. We're going to cover that a little bit and kind of see where it relates into the topic that we're focusing on today, the climate change. So if that interests you at all, stick around. Like I said, if you want to watch or follow along with the videos and not just have the audio, download the Spotify app, follow me on there, and you'll see the video portion of the episode as well. That being said, thank you very much for being a listener. Thanks for bearing with me through the introduction, and let's get started. So this is just right off of Wikipedia, guys. I did a little bit of research. These episodes, the more traditional ones now, are a little more research based. I do a little more preparation beforehand, not a ton, but enough to kind of give us a little bit of a structure to the show, so that it's a little more directed and pointed on topics like the one we're focusing on today. So weather modification, I think, is important to define before we move forward. Off of Wikipedia, weather modification is the act of intentionally manipulating or altering the weather. So intentionally is important here. The most common form of weather modification is cloud seeding, which increases rain or snow, usually for the purpose of increasing the local water supply. Weather modification can also have the goal of preventing damaging weather, such as hail or hurricanes, from occurring, or of provoking damaging weather against the enemy as a tactic of military. You might find that interesting. Or economic warfare like Operation Popeye. We'll read about that in just a second. Where clouds were seeded to prolong the monsoon in Vietnam. Weather modification in warfare has been banned by the United Nations under the Environmental Modification Convention. So I thought it was very important to read that to start off, because it might be shocking to any of you listening just to hear that some of these things are real, because that's the experience I had when I first started to dive into research on this topic. Is my understanding of the weather and climate change was based and predicated on the idea that human beings were changing the climate, but indirectly, right? That human beings were tampering with weather, and thus, over a long period of time affecting the climate through non-intentional means, burning fossil fuels, releasing carbon dioxide and other, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and causing warming on a global scale. Now, that's fine and good, as long as we're aware of the parts of our society that are intentionally manipulating the weather and thus possibly the climate over a long period of time, right? So that's important to set up. And like I said, it's a little hard to believe that, we already have, the United Nations actually has weather modification banned, like as part of, I believe, the Geneva Convention, right? Or the Environmental Modification Convention, to be specific, which I find fascinating, because they'd only ban something if they had the technology, the ability, or at some point in the past, somebody used it in that way to harm people. Why don't we know about that? If you're asking yourself that question, why aren't we aware of this? That's the same question that I'm asking. So that led me to kind of look into to do a little research myself. And that's what led me to find this paper that you're looking at right now. It's called, or titled, Benign Weather Modification. I found this off just a quick Google search using the term benign weather modification. Now, I want to point this out because in my research, what I found, and we'll read a little bit of it here from Barry B. Cobble. Yeah, that's his name. But the terminology that's used around weather modification is very important to know if you want to find information and data on what's going on around us. Because if you don't know the terms, you won't find it in the search results. If you just type in climate change, what you're going to find is all of the articles you're used to finding, all of the videos you're used to finding. But if you type in benign weather modification, you'll find works like this. You'll find other information that's a little bit more conspiratorial, but actually fact-based. Data, like I said, stories, like we'll read about Operation Popeye, of past timeframes where we've used weather and manipulated it intentionally, even in warfare. So We'll read about Operation Popeye first, and then we'll go back to that paper, because that paper is very important. It's a little lengthy, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So Operation Popeye, that operation that this Wikipedia page was referencing in relation to military operations using weather modification, we'll read a little bit about here, and I'm reading this for the first time too with you guys. So Operation Popeye, Sober Popeye, Project Controlled Weather Popeye, Motor Pool, Intermediary Compatriot, I don't know why that full name was necessary, was a military cloud seeding project carried out by the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam War in 1967 through 1972. The highly classified program attempted to extend the monsoon season over specific areas of the Ho Chi Minh Trail in order to disrupt North Vietnamese military supplies by softening road surfaces and causing landslides. The former U.S. Secretary of Defense, Robert S. McNamara, was aware that there might be objections raised by the international scientific community, but said in a memo to the president that such objections had not in the past been a basis for prevention of military activities considered to be in the interest of U.S. national security. What a quote there. What a statement. I don't know if it's a direct quote, but my goodness, the hubris, the audacity built into that statement. The chemical weather modification program was conducted from Thailand over Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, and allegedly sponsored by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. And the CIA, without the authorization of then Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird, who had categorically denied to Congress that a program for modification of the weather for use as a tactical weapon even existed. So, a little bit of history on one of the operations that's taken place in order to use the weather as a weapon. We'll read a little bit more here in this introductory chapter of this paper that was written by Barry B. Cobble. Now, he is a major, I believe, at the time when he wrote this. He's gone on. We'll find out in here, but he's a military veteran, and he wrote this when he was studying for his doctorate. This is I believe it was for his doctorate, he says in the paper. He wrote this paper, this thesis on weather modification and its use or potential use in military operations and other operations, even civilian applications, which is absolutely fascinating. So we'll read a little bit of this introduction because it has another story in here regarding how we've used weather modification in the past militarily. Introduction, Chapter 1. You can find all of the information that I'm reading from here. I'll be in the show notes, so I have links there, and you can look it up yourself as well if you'd like to. Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Mark Twain. On the 30th of August, 1995, a French Mirage 2000N carrying 2 crew members was shot down over Bosnia during Operation Deliberate Force. 2 parachutes were spotted descending to Earth, leading to the planning for a rescue attempt. The first combat search and rescue attempt, scheduled for 6 September 1995, was canceled due to unsatisfactory launch site weather for the participating aircraft. A second CSAR mission was then scheduled for 7 September 1995. The second CSAR mission consisted of 4 helicopters and 4 variants of the C-130. Providing protection and close air support were 10 additional aircraft. All aircraft took off with no problems, and the mission was a smooth one until arrival of the CSAR package at the search area. There, the aircraft encountered an unanticipated condition: fog. Fog was covering the valley where they expected to locate the crewmen. In all, 18 aircraft had flown that night, only to be thwarted from completing their mission by a fog bank. To the end of September, the Bosnian Serbian army told the world that they held the crew as prisoners, having captured them soon after they ejected over their territory. Their release came later. Weather and war. The two concepts are closely linked, apparently. Warriors throughout the ages have used weather to their advantage, and some have suffered from its effects on the outcome of battles. The timing of the Normandy invasion on D-Day 6 June 1944 was dictated by a favorable weather forecast. While the Allied weather forecasters got it right, the German forecasters felt the weather would prohibit the successful crossing of the English Channel. This forecast contributed to the unsuspecting mood of the German military on that particular day. During the same war, but in a different theater, the Japanese used the weather to conceal their approach to the Hawaiian Islands, enhancing their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. There are numerous examples of situations where weather played the critical role in the outcome of war. Historically, the military adapts to the weather. What if military forces could shape the weather to enhance operations, hinder or prevent enemy operations, or both? Such is the promise of weather modification and its role in support of the military. This was written in 1997. So that kind of gives us a little bit of a setup here. Now, this is a study that he did, right? But it's really important to read through this. Why I picked through this a little bit, because it's too long to read in the entire show here, and it'd be a little bit dull if I did. I have other things lined up that kind of explain the point a little bit more clearly in an entertaining fashion. But what I found as I read through this was that not only is weather modification, does it exist, but it's been around for a very long time, which is why we have conventions restricting its use. So not only has it been used in the way he describes here, or attempted to be used in the way he describes here, in terms of trying to affect fog. The airports themselves actually have systems, many airports do, that can reduce fog on foggy mornings. I don't know exactly how that works, but it's a system that they deploy on the runways themselves that can reduce fog. In addition, there's also cloud seeding abilities as well. We kind of read about a little bit here. Where's this at here? Cloud seeding, which is another topic that's been very controversial for a long time. You have the chemtrails kind of the controversy that's been going around for probably 10 or 15 years now. All of us at some point, I'm sure, have looked up in the sky and seen these trails that look very odd because they're not full-size clouds. They're just long lines, sometimes even perpendicular or parallel to each other, in ways that nature doesn't usually produce, right? And people for a long time have been wondering, what is that? What's happening there? I think this might be the answer here. The fact that this was not overtly told to us that these kind of programs are going on, but we're finding out now just through kind of it being available on Wikipedia, right? This seeping of the information so that people can't get angry about it, I think is what's happening right now with all of this. It's like as soon as I started to look into benign weather modification, I got this feeling of like, yeah, of course that exists. And this is more of an intuitive feeling, so this is going more in the spiritual side, right, guys? But I got this intuitive feeling like, why would I feel like that's like somebody's telling me, yeah, of course that exists? It made me feel kind of stupid. It's like, well, you should have known that, of course. And I'm picking up, this is just, like I said, an intuitive message here, that the powers that be are intentionally trickling out information, not only just this kind of information, but things like aliens, other very controversial conspiratorial topics, because the term conspiracy was invented to label anything that was not part of the narrative, right? So it doesn't mean that it's false, it just means it's unpopular, or it could be dangerous to the mainstream narrative, which is why it's important, as people have more tools like we do right now, like we're doing right now, the internet, publicly posted information, it's very hard to restrict that. So you slowly have to let people know, oh, it does exist, right? You seep it out instead of having some, overt statement like we've all dreamed about in terms of aliens, of, hey, aliens are here. That kind of recognition on a public stage also brings in a lot of other recognitions the public would have, like, okay, you're telling us about it now. What about before? Same thing with the cloud seeding idea. So I believe the reason we can find information like what we're seeing right now, what we're looking at right now, nowadays, and it was harder to find before, is because it just didn't exist. It was controlled. The internet hadn't spread as far. And now it's gotten to a point of no return where this information can't be controlled completely, so that now it has to be slowly legitimized in a way that people don't notice, right? So that then 10 years down the road, we can all look back and say, yeah, of course we've had cloud seeding. Of course we had weather modification. Of course we had all of this stuff going on while we were telling you you're changing the climate, right? While we're telling you that you are changing the climate because you're driving to work in a gas-burning car, this kind of stuff is going on and has been for a very long time, right? Let's read a little more. Cloud seeding. It's aggravating, isn't it? Cloud seeding is a type of weather modification that aims to change the amount or type of precipitation that falls from clouds by dispersing substances into the air that serve as cloud, condensation, or ice nuclei. We'll watch a little bit about this and how it works in a video I have right after this, which alter the microphysical processes within the cloud. Its effectiveness is debated. Some studies have suggested that it is difficult to show clearly that cloud seeding has a very large effect. The usual objective is to increase precipitation, rain, or snow, either for its own sake or to prevent precipitation from occurring in days afterward. Now, let's just pause here. The whole premise of what we are doing here as human beings is something that, from a divine perspective, is like building the Tower of Babel. It's Titanic 2, right? It's the same. It's the reason why that hubris message, I believe, was hammered home so hard with the sinking of the Titan in relation to the Titanic, the hubris undertones that kind of were relayed to everyone. Hey, watch out, don't get overconfident, because this is what happens. And we have to remind you of that apparently again, right? In such a ironic way with the Titan sub and the Titanic that it's impossible to not recognize the lesson that you forgot that we taught on the Titanic, right? Something like that. It's a very interesting message coming through, but it's the same kind of the idea that the human beings have reached a point where they are omniscient enough to know a system as complicated as climate, right? And then to be able to affect the weather patterns somehow knowing that you're not affecting the climate. Part of the definition, and I'm paraphrasing somewhat here, of climate in the modern terms is the thing that differentiates climate from weather is one, it takes place over a long period of time, right? Weather is short time frame, climate's long time frame, but also that the patterns that are taking place in the climate are not always directly linked to the weather that's taking place. So there's what that means basically, from what I've understood or taken away from it, is that as scientists, we don't know exactly what is going on. The entire system, the climate is too complicated to be able to map completely, right? So that we have to put in that kind of caveat there. The thing that differentiates the climate from the weather is we can predict weather. We can't predict the climate. Something like that, which is confusing, right? When you take that definition and then apply it to the modern day and climate change, because all of these scientists have said that they really know what's going on with the climate. They've predicted it and modeled it. Well, partially from the definition that I understand of what differentiates climate from weather is the fact that it can't be modeled properly because of its complicated nature. So how are you doing that, right? Anyway, I digress. Some of the ways that they use, some of the things they use to seed clouds, we'll read through here. They use salts, right? So different. Silver iodide is one of them, which sounds fantastic to have floating around in the sky. Potassium iodide, dry ice, liquid propane, apparently as well, and even table salt. So anything with a crystalline structure, essentially what it says here, when cloud seeding, increased snowfall takes place when temperatures within the clouds reach -20 to -7. Introduction of a substance such as silver iodide, which has a crystalline structure similar to that of ice, will induce freezing nucleation. So basically what it is they're providing a space to where on which ice can form or precipitation can gather. So even though it's a very small particle, microscopic particle, it's enough to condense on, which then forms clouds. When you disperse large amounts of this all in one area, then you create a cloud, right? This is the idea. So we're going to read a little bit about infrared laser pulses here, because that's another topic we're going to get into a little bit later in the show, and it might be interesting. Didn't see this before. Infrared laser pulses. An electronic mechanism was tested in 2010 when infrared laser pulses were directed to the air above Berlin by researchers from the University of Geneva. The experimenters posited that the pulses would encourage atmospheric sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide to form particles that would then act as seeds. So let's shoot some lasers in the sky. Hope that it doesn't mess anything up. Right? We're experimenting on weather and the climate, and then not recognizing that could have some downstream effects that we are not recognizing. So let's move on here to one of my first little videos that I want to show you, because it has to do with cloud seeding and weather modification that I've came across this video on TikTok. This is actually one that I reposted here. You can see I did a duet here. But it was originally posted by @WilsonStanfield91. So I'll put, again, all of these links in here to the content creators so that you can support them, follow them, check it out yourself if you want to. But I found this very interesting. This actually got me very angry when I saw this video, because one of the things I've been experiencing this summer in Phoenix is in a very odd weather patterns relative to what traditionally happens in the desert. You know, I've lived here for over 25 years, I think, at this point, off and on. So I've had a lot of seasons to recognize or get used to what happens in the desert in terms of the monsoon weather. And what's been very odd about this season is the utter lack of cloud cover. And I mean lack of cloud cover. In a time frame when we're supposed to be covered in clouds and getting the most rain we get in the entire year, for over 2 months, I didn't see a cloud. And it was so odd. I mean, that sounds like I'm exaggerating. Maybe once, you see a little sporadic one over here, but it was so odd that it stuck out to me, that I kept on looking up at the sky, like, why is there no clouds anywhere? And why is it, and as it kept on drawing on, like, this is very consistent. This is odd. There's no moisture in the time frame when it's supposed to be downpouring. And your initial reaction would be like, well, it must be climate change, right? Let's find out.
What if you could fire a laser at the sky and make it rain? Oh, that sounds more interesting. Dave Malkoff explains.
Just another stormy, wet afternoon in central Florida. But what if you could pick up all this rain and move it where it's needed? Texas or California? What if a laser could start the rain?
So you can almost use it to set it off.
Matt Mills got into lasers as a kid.
It's just innately cool.
Now he's part of a team of scientists and military backers on the cutting edge of a new technology, making lasers powerful enough to reach up here into the sky where a thunderstorm is just about to start.
Hubris.
In the near future, a push-button storm starter could be a real thing.
Just imagining this situation. If there was a rain cloud that was going to pass over an area of drought and not rain, you could, theoretically induce the rain and get the rain where it's needed.
That storm starter isn't the laser beam itself, but rather a popping energy that comes off of much higher power beams than this one. The problem is those pops have always had trouble getting into the sky.
Oh, good.
Now Matt has discovered a way to get the laser to pop all the way in the clouds.
Perfect.
In theory,
thank God.
That's what starts a storm.
Nothing could be wrong with that.
We created a cloud of our own behind Matt's lab. A few months ago, Matt's colleagues in Arizona got this working experimentally.
That's where I live.
Is to get it to work.
No wonder we haven't had rain for 2 months.
Particles in the air are rubbing together, forming static electricity, and the conditions are now right. And they just need to be triggered now.
Does this concern you that you may be messing with Mother Nature and doing something that you don't completely understand up here in the cloud?
I mean, I suppose that's always a danger, but we're not even near to the case where it could be dangerous yet, so not too much.
It's almost like an on-off switch for a thunderstorm.
That's the idea.
And when did we start this research?
Yep.
In Orlando.
Just yesterday?
Dave Malkoff, the Weather Channel.
So, as you can probably tell, I'm a little feisty in that video, and even just watching it again, I'm very feisty, because my goodness, we are not told about this, right? Until we are, obviously. But like I said at the very end of that video, what we just started this research yesterday? Obviously not, right? It's been going on for quite a while here. And as you heard in there, very casually dropping in private and military backers, right? This technology has military applications. And if we're honest, if you look into the way that our economy works, especially in technological development, the military gets it first. We get the technology in the modern consumer market trickles out of the military market about 20 or 30 years after it's become obsolete, or when it's becoming obsolete, right? When we're moving on to new, more advanced versions of that technology. So that being said, it makes me very curious on what types of technologies do we have modern day? At what level have we gotten to? Which leads me to another video This is off of the Sean Ryan Show again. So just like last week, same show. I hope you guys have checked him out. Go follow the Sean Ryan Podcast on all the major platforms. You can check out the video I'm about to show you here on YouTube. This will just be a short, about 10-minute snippet of it. But this is a very interesting, fascinating interview by a kind of obscure figure named Eric Hecker that worked at Antarctica as a firefighter for Raytheon. Which Raytheon is one of those military contractors, one of the biggest ones in the United States. I'm going to read a little bit from the description of the show notes here, and then we'll go ahead and watch this video. But he has a lot to say about what he worked on down at the South Pole. Last but certainly not least, Eric Hecker, closes out our Whistleblower Marathon this week on SRS. So he's part of the whistleblower group that's going through Congress recently, or gone through Congress recently and testified. So he's testified what he's about to say under oath, under threat of perjury, right? Eric is former Navy and contractor for Raytheon, a major U.S. defense contractor. Eric's position as a firefighter and plumber for the South Pole facility gave him unrestricted access to the compound. During his stay, Eric observed highly advanced directed energy weapons and other technologies beyond what we previously thought possible. Eric has also testified to Congress under oath and hopes to bring his experience to the public for the good of humanity. So, without further ado, Eric Hecker and his story.
The ice cube neutrino detector is not simply a passive listening device as presented for the science.
Second here, guys. Actually, I'm going to give you a little bit further back. We'll start about here.
What happens when the prostate enlarges and the urine channel gets tight?
That sucks. Sorry for that. There was a little ad that popped up there. Okay, let's try this again.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I think they're still legal in all 50 states.
Okay.
Raytheon Technologies Corporation. Raytheon is an aerospace company that provides advanced systems and services for commercial, military, and government customers worldwide. Probed for corruption in government contracting since 1980s. You were in the South Pole from 2010 to 2011. Let's talk about what you were doing down there.
You got it.
What were you doing down there?
I was contracted for the summer season as a plumber. I did well enough in my summer season to garner a winter contract as well, which got me my full year's stay. I was also tasked with being a firefighter. I was a lead on the firefighting team, and because of that dual role capacity, I physically held a key that opened every single door in the facility. I had complete access to every compartment they manufactured. That was a rare position to be in.
What are you blowing the whistle on?
That there are technologies at the South Pole Station that people can't even consider that exist on this planet.
Like what?
Directed energy weapon systems is something that people need to get in their vocabulary fast. The ice cube neutrino detector is not simply a passive listening device as presented for the science that they're claiming it to do. It also has the capacity to transmit. There are embedded in the ice what are called digital optical modules, DOMs. They're about the size of a basketball. The array embedded in the ice is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. It is the world's largest telescope. And now, because we have proven that it can transmit, it's the world's largest directed energy weapons system. It is responsible for the earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2011 on the front end of the year.
How do you know for a fact that that was responsible for that?
Because I was present, and I have gone over this with the pertinent people that I will not be releasing their names.
Okay.
But I was on the team, let's just say, and I've confirmed this.
Well,
I've provided documentation from the actual manufacturer specs. So this unit was constructed, operated, and maintained by the University of Wisconsin, and just like every other device on the planet, whether you're driving an M1 Abrams tank or operating the ice cube neutrino detector, there's operator's manuals that tell you how things work. Right there in that information, free for everybody to find. I found it myself. I was directed to find it, I'll put it that way, and release this information. And it states very clearly that each one of these DOMs can transmit at 2,047 volts each. So these are currently the facts of life.
How do you know? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, how did it even come to your attention that this triggered an earthquake? If you're at the South Pole and New Zealand had an earthquake, I mean, how did you know it came from the South Pole?
Without divulging names?
Without divulging names.
I could only say that it was communicated to me from team members that were present and fully read in at the time that they were aware. And since that time...
at the immediate, like the same day?
Oh, absolutely. It was understood.
Well, what was said?
That we accidentally hit Christchurch, New Zealand twice when they were trying to fire up this weapon for the first time. That it was friendly fire. It was not on purpose, but it occurred. That the system is designed for that. And it was just friendly fire.
So this is a telescope. That sounds like a... Is it a telescope?
Absolutely. It is a neutrino detector, for sure. It can accomplish its primary purpose. It can also transmit and then provide a multifaceted platform for directed energy weapons systems.
Do you have any idea how the earthquake was initiated?
From misfiring the system.
Where
were they targeting?
Yes.
I don't know.
Does it go into the earth? Does it go into the atmosphere?
It can definitely go through the earth. I would consider that it might be able to do stuff in the atmosphere. I haven't heard that statement laid at its feet, but I wouldn't put it past it. I don't want to try to limit the functions of this device by my imagination or experience. I believe that's one of the problems with directed energy weapons, is they are not like standard weapons of old where you have a gun and a particular caliber bullet, you pull the trigger and it does one thing. These platforms are way more complex than that. They do a lot of things.
What else do they do?
Excuse me. This system, additionally, in regards to the neutrinos, it detects the neutrinos that are apparently coming off of the new exotic propulsion systems for either off-world UFOs or reverse-engineered stuff on our planet.
What is neutrino?
Neutrino is a near-massless particle that goes at, close, or beyond the speed of light. It is so small that it can pass between the electron shell and the nucleus of pretty much every atom on the planet. And the capacity of being detected at the South Pole Station, when the neutrino impacts the nucleus of the water molecule of the ice in the glaciers at the pole, a reaction occurs. The nucleus and the neutrino become destroyed. A muon is created and ejected, and a blue flash of light known as Cherenkov radiation flashes in the ice. And that's what the DOMs, the digital optical modules, are detecting. That's their primary purpose as presented. Now, whether that neutrino comes from a quasar out in space or a exotic propelled engine off of vehicles that aren't being discussed contemporarily, it detects it, thus making it basically an air traffic control center for all non-discussed vehicles on this planet. So just like we have all the other air traffic on the planet and it's being completely observed and attended to, there's just another level of craft on this planet and another level of air traffic control tower that exists. This is that facility.
Now, this isn't scientific.
So I guess that we'll pause it there because it's going to try to go on another commercial there, and I don't want that to mess up our flow here. But kind of stunning, right? Testimony. One of the reasons I was so kind of interested in listening to that testimony, why I wanted to put it on here, was because while what he's saying, what the gentleman is saying, what Eric Hecker is saying, it sounds fanciful and non-real. When he starts to describe it, I find myself kind of being unable to deny how well he speaks about the topic and how well informed he is. On top of that, the fact that he testified these things in front of Congress, it seems to make sense, some of what he's saying, especially in the context of what we were talking about before. Now, I don't want to watch too much more from that video again because it's not my work, and you should go watch it yourself. But later on in that episode, Eric goes on a little bit deeper into what these kind of platforms can be used. And like he said, it's kind of, you can limit the use of the platform based on how wide your imagination can go, something like that. So one of the things he said, which I found very interesting, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I wanted to throw it in here before we move on, was that these weapons, directed energy weapons, have been or have the ability to affect brainwaves, thoughts themselves, and that there's actually a article here we'll find. Let's pull it up here. Let me see here. I can find the right article. So the one that I'm thinking of later on, Eric goes on to explain that McDonald's recently has released or published that they're looking into technology that would allow them to advertise to you while you're sleeping. And this Popular Mechanics article I just pulled up apparently thinks it might be here already. Let's read a little bit about it. This is Advertisers Are Hijacking Your Dreams, Scientists Say, on Popular Mechanics by Caroline Delbert. Just the bullet points. Advertisers could be reaching you while you sleep. Evidence shows. A group of sleep researchers is calling for regulation of these so-called sleep ads to minimize any potential harmful impacts. Dream implantation works by playing sounds or using smells to prime your brain. Now, what Eric is talking about is another level below this. It's not using anything to prime you for it. What it's doing, from what I understand, if you watch the video, is it's actually sending this information via wavelength, electromagnetic wavelength, into your brain. Right? So it's literally like mind control device is the best way I can imagine it. So you can use these directed energy, you can use in a lot of different ways to affect people, the world, and the environment in a lot of different ways, right? So as he said before, when they transmit, when they use that massive amount of potential energy and they send it towards a specific source, they can cause a lot of things to happen. The one that he brought up was the Christchurch, New Zealand earthquakes, where when they were testing this, they unintentionally caused an earthquake. So this is an example of how, as we dabble in this field of weather modification, or our ability, even if it's not directly tied to weather modification, if we're just using weapons at a scale that have the ability to affect things like our climate and weather, we should know about that, don't you think? Especially if we're having a conversation politically and we're being compelled to jump on board with a bunch of social moves and pressures to restrict our freedoms as consumers and individuals based on a lie that I'm starting to believe now is a lie, that the reason the climate is being affected and changing so drastically is simply based on our carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions. That this doesn't make any sense. Matter of fact, when you start to look at these stories, it makes zero sense. What effects are these having on the climate? These kind of technologies, this is one of them, right? This is one that is currently being used. But again, as he's talking about here, as Eric talks about here, these things are, if we're finding out about this is in development. He goes on later in the episode to tell Sean, like, hey, if they're developing this technology, if McDonald's is getting a hold of this brainwave technology, like I said earlier, where did it come from? The consumer market doesn't get something before the military market. So where has this been applied and deployed in the past 20 or 30 years? What's been going on to us, right? To the human beings around the world. There's another topic, and we'll save it for another day, that we can go in that ties into that mind manipulation idea called Havana Syndrome. A very interesting topic, something that I have actually experienced, I believe, that we'll save for an entire episode. But I wanted to throw that in there and talk a little bit about that before we move on, because it's really important to point out that these systems, these energy systems, they're not intentionally, even if they are intentionally developed as weapon systems, they're multifaceted so that they can be described as something other than that, right? As a neutrino detector. And these are how they are sold to the American public. This is how they're billed in our government, in the acts that fund them, right? And this is how it continues on forward without us knowing that anything's going on. there's so much going through my head right now. For me, and I hope for you as a listener, as a viewer, as you watch this, you know, this is starting to get you to think a little bit about the different places in the world where you've been compelled to act in terms of climate change, right? Doesn't mean that those things that we've talked about, you know, CO2 gases, these kind of things, greenhouse gases, have, hey, the synchronicity, don't have an effect. They obviously do have an effect, and I'm not denying that. But I think we deserve to know the entire story as a populace before we're told or villainized as the only culprit, when there's obviously things out here like we just watched that could be or are affecting the world and the climate in some way. This is just what we know about. Anyway, so that being said, is there any evidence for weather modification taking place now, right? And from another TikTok video here I'm going to show you, I do believe there is evidence of it, and it's from a profile that I've been following for a little while now called Microsite. And he posts a lot of videos about geoengineering, weather modification, but specifically he follows the NORAD, I think it's NEXRAD, radar centers that have been deployed around the United States. This is from the National Centers for Environmental Information. And I'll read you a little bit about what NEXRAD is. It's the Next Generation Weather Radar. The Next Generation Weather Radar NEXRAD system is a network of 160 high-resolution S-band Doppler weather radars, jointly operated by the National Weather Service, the Federal Aviation Administration, and here's the kicker, the U.S. Air Force. Why does the Air Force need to be a part of the weather monitoring system? Well, I mean, it makes sense because they're going to fly around, but also, I guess that's your answer. The NEXRAD system detects precipitation and wind, and its data can be processed to map precipitation patterns and movements. And CEI provides access to archived NEXRAD Level 2 data and Level 3 products. That's the expressed, you know, like we were talking about with this neutron detector, that's the public purpose of these facilities, NEXRAD. But from what I've been watching, just like the neutrino detector, this energy system, even a radar system, it's a capacitive system, right? It can store energy, so that means it can also release that energy if designed to do so. If you were to have a weapons version of it, or a manipulative version of it, right, of a radar system, if you wanted to be able to use it to modify weather, you would get it to broadcast to transmit instead of receive, like Eric was saying, right? Because then you're pushing that energy out into the earth or into the sky or the clouds or wherever. Just like we were seeing with lasers, that's all a laser is, right? Is just a directed energy, a directed energy light, but it's energy, right? So let's take a look at this video, because what this shows is the hurricanes, and it's a little hard to watch. We might watch it a couple times because it's a little hard to see what's going on here. But what it's going to show you is a overlay of cloud patterns with the NEXRAD radar map, I guess is what it's called, right? It shows where the NEXRAD radar stations are, and then also what they're doing at that time frame. So he overlaid these two things, and he's done many of these. But let's take a watch and see what we can see.
Notice what happens to Fernanda right here. Now, this had a very well-defined eye wall. You can see the blast patterns and the icicle pattern all the way around that. That's the heated air rushing out at high speed, which causes this icicle pattern, these pressure waves. That's the superheated water vapor rushing away from the center of the targeted area. And then we see a lot of evaporation, and basically there's nothing left of Fernanda. Just think of Hurricane Ian last season, which was allowed to bear down and just completely destroy Fort Myer and that entire area. Another one down here, Hillary. This is scheduled to move right up the Baja coast and into Southern California. And we can see that they've got it scheduled as a hurricane through Friday morning, and then it weakens, and then it somehow regains strength right here, indicating on Sunday morning. So this is pointed right at San Diego and Tijuana, And it'll be very interesting to see those WSR-88D ground-based microwave.
Guys, if you can see here, I'm going to pause this for a second. You see these little lines shooting out here, right? It's very hard to see initially, but this is a representation of the beam that the radar station is pushing out, right? At least this is the way I've understood it. And what you do is watch for these little beams, because as you see the clouds and the precipitation go over, you'll see these beams affect either how they're gathering or how they're dispersing, right? And it's very obvious, especially when you start watching these over and over again, that something is affecting the cloud formation above these areas, right? He's using Hillary for this, but the ones that I've watched have been kind of all over the country. I specifically saw them at first when we started hearing about the Canadian wildfires, the first time I saw a video like this, but let's continue watching.
Microwaves chopping up and evaporating all the rain potential from this system.
So, a little bit about that video. It shows you a little bit of what I'm talking about there in that little section. But what he is talking about more on this video is the hurricanes. And at the very beginning, he's showing you a hurricane that's very powerful. It's a hurricane force storm, and then it all of a sudden breaks apart internally. Now, from what I understand, this is not usually how hurricanes go away. They are turbulent air, right? So there's no way that it doesn't implode from the inside out, it dies out, right? At least that's the way I've understood it. So when we're watching that video, as we can do here,
news alert, you're not gonna
wrong one, apologies here.
Fox News alert, you're not gonna believe what kind of obnoxious...
Apparently somebody wants to get on the TV screen, apologies for that. Anyway, you get the point, right? Now, seeing that, and like I said, recognizing that in Phoenix, I've been experiencing, I was experiencing and questioning in my head before I saw these videos, why I'm not seeing clouds in the sky. Now, the video we watched earlier, the first one about cloud seeding, was talking about how you can use the lasers to induce cloud formation. But what this second video we just watched was kind of demonstrating is you can use the energy in multiple ways. You can break up cloud cover by overcharging it, or you could induce cloud cover by inducing the right amount of charge in the atmosphere to create condensation, right? So these facilities, from what I understand, genuinely do, if they're transmitting like that, which it appears that they are, have the ability to both create clouds, rain, and to disperse the rain, or disperse storms specifically, which, if that's the case, it begs a huge question about if we have the power to determine storms, or at least to determine how powerful they are, about what storms actually make landfall, which he starts to raise that question. If we have this ability, then the storms that do destroy communities and make landfall, there's a huge moral and ethical issue there that we aren't allowed to talk about because we don't know what's going on if that's the case, right? On top of the moral and ethical issues of just modifying the climate without knowing what's going to happen long term anyway. So, as kind of a segue, I was describing there that I first heard about this gentleman when I was hearing about the Canadian wildfires, and those happened 2 or 3 months ago, right? Kind of at the beginning of the summer. And they were very odd, these Canadian wildfires. Matter of fact, guys, we're going to take a little pause here because I have to do a bathroom break, which I don't usually have to do, but I don't want to rush this podcast. So I'm going to take a little bathroom break and I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. Okay, we are back. Sorry about that, guys. Let's go ahead and get back into it. So recognizing that there's these different forms of weather modification taking place, some of them which are not being overtly talked about, some of them which are being kind of talked about slowly in this trickle way through different stories coming out over time about what's been going on. I'm trying to develop a picture or form a picture for you as a listener, as I do it myself, of what's actually happening. There's been all of these different events, these catastrophic events over the last year specifically. And just today, as a matter of fact, I'm watching the television and I see an ad go across talking about showing videos of all these wildfires, specifically the one we're about to watch. the Canadian wildfire, and how all these people suffering and all of this. And then it ends with something like climate change, a big plastered climate change. It's a political message, an advertisement taking advantage of natural disasters that are happening at a more prevalent pace. Nature doesn't benefit one political party, right? It doesn't side with a political party. So if somehow natural disasters are aligning to a political message, there's something going on there, folks. There's something not true about that. Matter of fact, there's something disgusting going on there that we're gonna find out about here. Let's watch. The Canadian wildfires were broadcasted, terrorized, the entire East Coast in smoke, and destroyed tons of land in Canada. And we didn't really ever find out what happened. I think they said it was lightning strike. Well, this is a video of directly over the part of Quebec where the fire started, when the fire started. You can see the clouds. Watch what happens.
And I ain't seen the sunshine.
Let's do that again.
Hear the train a-coming.
Watch. One right here. One
It's
right here. Boom, 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 boom. So many places.
And I ain't seen the sunshine.
Man, there was a lot of lightning, wasn't there? So many clouds to produce the lightning that caused that wildfire. Apparently, from what I understand, that's the mainstream story still, is that the wildfire was started by lightning. Or something to that effect. Even if it wasn't, if it was started by a cigarette, that's a lot of people smoking at the same time, isn't it? A lot of people throwing those butts out of the window at the same time, isn't it? It's bullshit. We're not being told what's going on. Watch this. Can anybody explain to me what the purpose of this is? Controlled burns is one, right? I could understand that. But why would you, if you're doing a controlled burn, dump it out of a pot from a helicopter? That's not very controlled. Matter of fact, that's probably going to spread like wildfire. What the hell is going on? So, for any of you that were out on the East Coast choking on smoke, there's some questions that we need to ask about what went on there. The Canadian government did some crazy shit this last year, especially surrounding the wildfires, becoming very tyrannical very quickly. And this isn't just happening in Canada, it's happening all across the world, specifically surrounding this, I'm just going to say it, this liberal agenda. I'm not a conservative. I would describe myself as classically liberal if I had to politically, but from what I can tell, there is a very specific agenda. This, like I've kind of started to go over today, the climate change agenda. It's also allied itself with all of the different victimhood groups, right? Regardless of what they are, that have coalesced into a specific type of corporatized messaging now that culminates with something like Pride, have Pride, every month of the year instead of just one. What's the other one? Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. They take all of these. There's this compulsion that we're feeling. Like for instance, with Target, I'm bisexual myself, so I'm not talking against the LGBTQ community by any means. I'm simply pointing out the fact that they've coalesced themselves with this agenda of other groups, and it's become a certain type of leviathan that is now walking around the world, defining the world, telling us what's going on when it's obviously not the truth. Specifically in this episode, trying to keep it somewhat pointed in terms of climate change. Now, that kind of brings us full circle, right? Just to start off here, we started off with the idea of climate change, but looking at all of these different videos that I've showed you, the different ways in which we're not being told the full story in different venues, but specifically around climate and weather and what's happening there. I think it's time for us as citizens to start questioning that narrative that we're being fed. and also starting to question why that narrative so happily ties to, you know, what benefits corporations or political groups, especially modern day, now that this messaging has become somewhat corporatized or has been become mainstream, and we become more politically radical, it's now becoming almost dangerous to speak out or to say something in contrast to the narrative of climate change. And that's why I'm making this video, even though it's most likely probably pretty disjointed because I'm developing the ideas with you as we go along here. These are just things that are intriguing to me, things that I see that make me question what's going on around me and that make me want to question more and to find more answers. And that is the point of this podcast, the Unfounded Podcast. And I would encourage you as a listener, as a viewer, to research this yourself, right? Because of course this is not complete by any means. This is just somebody going and doing the research that they enjoy. But there is, I believe, there in all of these areas that when looked at as legitimate, start to deconstruct the worldview that we're being fed and show it as false, what it truly is. So that brings me to kind of how we're going to wrap up the episode here. And at the very end, I have a very kind of an interesting story to cover to tie things up, switch gears a little bit. But before we do that, I wanted to cover, like I said before earlier in the episode, a little bit about the Hawaiian wildfires, because I do believe it actually could relate to some of the things we're talking about here today. Now, this is again very conspiratorial and it's just unfolding right now, but many of you probably have seen and heard the controversy coming out of Hawaii, of the wildfires there. Forgive me for not remembering the name of the actual location. That there's some oddities of the way the fire spread, specifically, and we'll find out here, we'll watch here. For some reason, things that were blue, and this sounds very odd, but for some reason, things that were blue in the Hawaiian fire didn't burn. Grouping, you'll see in the video here, a pot, some cars, some canopies, things like that. Everything else is completely burned, and the blue things aren't. And this leads you to ask a question like, why? Right? Well, I found this video. Take a look. And this was in context to the Hawaiian fires. Now, I'm not saying this is exactly what happened, but it's the only thing I've found that answers the question why blue things are still sitting around there. I don't know. I mean, there's one of the blue cars. There's another one. I got a better video for you. There you go. Take a look at this. This gentleman I just saw this morning here.
Okay, guys, this is the last episode I'm going to do for a
blue
while.
Canopy
but
right there.
It should be a pretty good one. It's
chair.
Things that did not burn during the fire. I went through hours of footage, and it was pretty interesting when I found here the famous umbrellas. These are actually Tommy Bahama umbrellas.
Am I the only one? Like, what the fuck?
I have pictures of these before the fire, so you can see what they actually used to look like. Not very different now. And then the sole surviving car on Front Street in front of the outlet mall. And I actually found another sole survivor car the other direction that's a little bit further south on Front Street, which I didn't notice at the time, but here it is right here. You can see it on the left in this frame here. Anyway, I'm going to just roll some of this footage. Most of this is unreleased. It doesn't really work that well with TikTok because this is all shot in 16:9, but I've got hundreds of gigabytes, many hours of footage, both on the ground and in the air. So all of that footage, again, has been uploaded to a friend in an undisclosed location. They then copied all of that data onto a 256 AES encrypted hard drive and then physically took it to somebody else. So if somebody's able to intercept that or get it, then we've lost. I mean, there's nothing more I could have done. In the middle of editing this footage last night, there was an incident where some people came to my house. They were banging on my door, and they were yelling, Jeff Cygnus, Jeff Cygnus. We made the decision just to kind of lay low and see if the situation escalated. I was ready to defend myself. It seemed like it was at least 2 people, I think potentially more.
You can see kind of here too, over in the background here. One of the big issues as he's talking about, as he is explaining, a lot of people that have been trying to bring out information about what's going on in Hawaii have been getting threats, like he's saying, specifically the homeowners. And you probably already heard about this, but the homeowners that have owned all these homes, many of them are being denied insurance claims based on the fact that they were zoned improperly, sometimes 60, 70 years ago, right? Things that they had no idea about. So being completely denied claims for that reason. And then also being offered by the same companies that they just recently went to battle with in court. I believe the state was trying to restrict them buying up some land or something like that. At least that's the story, the way I heard it. These same organizations came in and tried to swoop in, offer lowball offers to the same people after they were denied insurance claims. So there's this developing narrative around what happened in Hawaii that's starting to look like corporate greed at the very least. But in terms of everything I've showed you here with the blue, I'm seriously just trying to figure out why there's blue stuff that didn't burn when it's sitting right in the middle of this like catastrophe. At the same time, many of the homeowners, many of the people that live there are asking why the millionaire mansions that are just down the street, sometimes right next door to where this happened, why they're still standing. There's issues with FEMA, from what I've heard, not showing up, period. They're not allowing people into the area. Reports are saying that there's as little as 1,000 people missing, as many as 3,000 people missing, which in this case, missing inside this area most likely means dead, right? At this point in time. I believe what's happening, in the same way I was talking about earlier, just not in the exact same situation, they're trickling out information about what happened here, I think, and that's what's going to happen, to try to reduce the outrage over what happened. I don't know how the fire started. There's been many videos on TikTok already saying that it was a laser energy weapon, like the video I just showed you. That's where I found that. I don't necessarily want to jump on that bandwagon right away, but I do have a very hard time understanding why things that were blue didn't burn from fire. That just doesn't make sense to me, right? And why certain homes burned and others didn't. That doesn't make sense to me. And also why the people are not allowed to go in there to help. In every other disaster scenario, you have individuals, volunteers, that they beg to come to those places to help clean up, to help search for survivors, to help, in some case, bury the dead even. People are being denied that. The locals on the island who are trying to do this are being locked out of the area. Why? There's something going on here, and I don't know what it is, but I think we're going to find out more as time moves forward. There's something going on here that's very tragic. You can feel that intuitively when you tap into this. The pain that many people are feeling right now is something that is unnatural. It didn't have to happen. The story goes that the way this started was from a power line that was too close to overgrown grasses and shrubs, which you could tell would most likely be, it's very possible based on the imagery and stuff we've seen from before the fire. So at the very, best would be negligence on part of the state to control, or the city to clear the area. But again, when you take it a little further and recognize that this just so happens to be benefiting in the ways that these different organizations are allowed to make offers on the land right after, sometimes in an insensitive time frame after it happened, when the shit's still smoldering, right? Mother Nature doesn't work that way. It doesn't benefit some people, right? When Mother Nature destroys something, it destroys something. So the thing that I want to leave you with as a listener and a watcher or a viewer is that kind of question of, why does it seem like Mother Nature has a political side now? Why does it seem like Mother Nature likes corporations or somehow never takes them out, or they never seem to have a bad day? But whenever normal working class human beings, Americans, you know, when they suffer, somehow Mother Nature's always against them, right? That's not the truth. That's what they want us to believe. That's a fucking lie if I've ever heard one, and it's a disgusting one that isn't being said out loud, which is why I made this video. And I hope you enjoyed this topic today of weather modification. Check it out for yourself. This is, again, not the most thorough work by any means. Many of these are just TikTok videos and podcasts, right? But I believe that this is the way the truth is coming out nowadays. There aren't experts and facts out in the world that you can trust more than others. You have to use your intuition to know what's true and what's not. That's always been the case. It's just becoming more obvious nowadays because there's so much intentionally misinformation out there. So we have to sense with every single story, like the Hawaiian story, like the Hawaiian wildfires, like the Canadian wildfires, like weather modification and cloud seeding. How do you feel when I talk about this, when the news talks about this, or when you get curious and you want to go research it? What do you feel? Do you feel that compulsion? That thing that society tells you, don't do the unpopular thing? Don't do something dangerous? You could get ostracized. You could become unpopular for doing that, right? If you tune into that, you'll recognize, again, that's something that isn't natural. That kind of compulsion is something that's very intentional. So, before we move on, before we end the show, I wanted to switch up the topic a little bit because I found this I saw this the other day, and this is just more of like a spooky kind of interesting story that we haven't heard anything from for a long period of time, and I really wanted to cover because I don't really have any answers for it, and I just think it's really interesting and spooky and cool. So you may remember the Malaysian Airlines disappearance back in, was it 2012 or whenever it was? There's some new developments on that front, and it's really crazy. Take a look.
I'll go ahead and play you the video posted directly from his Twitter here, so give this a listen.
Go, India, Oscar, Uniform, Sierra, Tango, Hotel, Echo, Yankee, Alpha, Romeo, Echo, November, Oscar, Tango, Hotel, Uniform, Mike, Alpha, November, 042933964230. Sierra, Oscar, Sierra, Delta, Alpha, November, Golf, Echo, Romeo, Sierra, Oscar, Sierra.
That's crazy.
Okay, so what you just heard are, in my opinion, a grouping of words belonging to something called the NATO phonetic alphabet. Which, if you've ever watched a movie regarding the military, you'll know that they assign each letter in the alphabet with a specific word, such as Alpha for A, Bravo for B, Charlie for C, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel, and so forth. And that's what we're hearing here. It sounds like some sort of message. We have a computer voice, obviously, spouting off all of these random, or what would seem in the beginning as random letters to this guy's voicemail, until it was later found out. And I've been following this, and he's been posting on his Twitter what he's been finding out, which is that the message literally translates to, quote, danger, SOS. It is dire for you to evacuate. Be cautious. They are not human. SOS. Danger, SOS.
Okay, so before we move on, just to clarify, because it took me a second to understand what he was saying there when I first watched this, what the phonetic alphabet that the lady or the recording was saying at the beginning, was Sierra, Foxtrot, you know, those kind of words, right? Take the first letter of each of those words and put it, you know, write out what it spells. That's what this person did, and that's what it spelled. It's spelled danger, SOS. It is dire for you to evacuate. Be cautious. They are not human. SOS, danger, SOS. And then it gave coordinates.
SOS, of course, is a code word for help. And after the message, it then gives a set of coordinates, which after listening to said message, the Twitter user Ty only had one thing to say, quote, I am throwing away my phone. And so the coordinates were then linked to what appears to be a barren area off the coast of Africa in the Republic of the Congo. Or at least that is one of the areas, depending on exactly what the GPS coordinates were. Now, 4chan, Reddit, these guys are all over this story. So they're trying to figure out what these coordinates lead to and what this message meant. Now, a few people have noted that the voicemail's coordinates corresponded with the area of the ill-fated Malaysian Flight 370, which, if you guys remember, disappeared off the face of the earth back in March of 2014 while flying from Malaysia to Beijing, China. And that possibly this voicemail could be coming from the missing black box of the plane. Now, again, this is just a theory. And things have gotten even creepier. Because as noted on Ty's Twitter page, he started receiving even more mysterious text messages in an unknown language. As you're seeing in his tweet here, where he wrote, quote, "Excuse me, what is going on?" And you can see he translated what appears to be a foreign language, which in English wrote, quote, "End the post that you just shared about the recording on your phone." Now, he also states on his Twitter that just a few days before he got the voicemail, that he was sitting in his car out front of his home when he said an unknown man walked up and started taking pictures of his house with a flash. Then he walked away. Later stating that it was 3 a.m. when this happened. He has no idea what was going on or what is going on. He says, since then, I haven't received any other calls or had anything else happen, but this is an interesting theory, which then links to another tweet that speaks about the fact that if you pay close attention to the recording, that there is an S sound right before the word danger, meaning that the recording is on a continuous loop. Here we have another tweet here saying, quote, "It also has been pointed out that the coordinates given are very close to where the Malaysian airplane went down. What if you are hearing the black box recording?" As well as the fact that a black box records the last interactions with a plane, and that is what we are actually hearing, the last warnings and cries from the ship asking to be saved. And so back to this freaky message here, which again, after translating these military alphabet code words, says, quote, "Danger SOS, it is dire for you to evacuate, be cautious, they are not human." And that, you guys, is what is apparently shaking the internet, as well as the man who received the text, along with the further text messages from an unknown person or persons telling him to stop talking about the mystery voicemail and to take his posts about it down immediately.
It's weird.
So does this have anything to do with this missing airplane? And if you guys also remember...
Oh, right. What? Hold on. One more video. Malaysian airplane disappears. There's a video of it, I think. I just remembered. Yeah, here. Now watch this one, guys.
New Malaysia Airlines
again,
flight.
I will post all of these creators, all of the links to these videos specifically in the show notes. So you can access them yourself, give them follows, go and check out the videos on your own platform as well. But check this out.
370 footage.
This is from a satellite. What on earth? Gotta wait for it. It takes a second. You got these things flying around it, right? Obviously. Who knows what the hell they are? Boom. One more time. So, I I think we're dealing with, this is a freaky time frame, guys. Something's going on in the world. Things are a-changing, if you couldn't tell, right? Not only are we not being told the truth in terms of climate and pretty much everything else, but I believe that the truth about the nature of reality is starting to come out. And because of that, videos like this are starting to surface. Without getting too much into it, it looks like that plane is popping into a portal or another dimension, or it just disappears, right? And that's actually, oddly enough, been one of the theories regarding the Malaysian Airlines flight, right? Was that maybe it flew into a portal or multi-dimensional portal. This has been the theory for a lot of the disappearances over the Bermuda Triangle, right? But what we see in the video is craft. We see 3 craft circle it, and almost like it's warming up for something or positioning themselves, generating energy so that it could create the portal or whatever you see happen there. Now, take this video. This came out like a day before I saw this other one on the Malaysian Airlines thing, so it's very interesting chain of events. Something is happening right now. And compared to the one we just watched about the black box, right? There's something going on. Something fishy happened on the Malaysian Airlines flight. And I know there was speculation that they found some of the wreckage at one point, but many people think that that was kind of a cover-up. They never found like pieces of a plane or anything like that. So Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, from what it looks like, is a multi-dimensional traveler and could have ended up in a completely different realm or time frame, dimension itself. And that's genuinely the best conclusion I have based on what I've watched, which is crazy, right? This is the world we live in, folks, and it's real. So, whether you believe it or not, I know it's a little crazy and out there, and this is TikTok. Take it with a grain of salt, right? Anybody can post anything. When you start seeing things gain popularity or different versions of it come out, you can start to trust it a little more. Specifically with the Malaysian Airlines flight and that other video, I've seen quite a few different posts on that, different versions of it, talking about it in different ways. So it seems fairly legitimate. Check it out yourself. Check out climate change. Look into climate change yourself. But specifically, it's not just about data, folks. It's one of the points I'm trying to bring through in this episode, is that if we want to figure out what's going on in our world, not only in terms of climate change, but everything else that isn't being told to us, we have to turn on that side of ourselves that's intuitive, that feels truth, feels whether you feel like you're being lied to or whether you're hearing the truth. You know when you're hearing the truth because it has a certain quality to it, a certain type of resonance. You get pulled into it, you lose track of time, and you stop thinking, you just consume it. Whereas when you're not being told the truth, you'll notice you'll vet that thing constantly. You'll question it. You may accept it because people say it very firmly or convincingly, but you don't believe it internally in the same way. This part of ourselves is the part of ourselves I talk about more readily in the channeled messages, the more spiritual episodes, right? But this part of ourselves is also necessary for us to engage with so that we can see the world rationally, oddly enough. We have to be able to intuitively know where truth is, to be able to be able to navigate the world rationally, be able to tell what's true and what isn't, right? I believe the world we live in right now, the mainstream narrative, the stories we've been told, matter of fact, are not only not the truth, they're anti-truths. They're the exact opposite of the truth. That not, like for instance with climate change, not only are you not the thing mainly affecting it, it's the people telling you you're the thing mainly affecting it that are the culprits. It's the exact opposite, right? It's a subject that Jordan Peterson talks about, anti-truths. It's different than just non-truths, or it's one of those terms, maybe just non-truth, but that there's a differentiation between somebody saying something they believe, but it not being true, and somebody intentionally telling you something they know is not true. It's a form of gaslighting, obviously, but those things that are said are different versions of lies, deeper versions of it, and we live in a world rife with it. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, guys. I hope it wasn't too heavy at all. I know that it's a heavy topic that I'm talking about. I know it jumped around a lot. This is a new format still, so I'm still getting my feet under me, but I really enjoyed creating it. And as we move forward, I'm sure I'll get better at kind of putting ideas together and giving you more substantial evidence to base your intuitive beliefs off of, right? But I think this is a format that I'm going to stick with because it just seems to work well. It's enjoyable, and I really want to be able to comment on some of these things that I see every day that make me want to yell at the wall or the ceiling, but don't have anybody to talk about it with. So I talk about it with you, and I hope you enjoy it. There will be another episode, some announcements real quick before we go. There'll be another episode of Channeled Live Messages coming out. When do I have it scheduled? I believe I post them on Saturday, right? So I have them alternating between this and the Channeled Messages. A nice little Channeled Message. It's a couple hours long. I'll get that posted for you. And then next week, same time, same place. Should be on Wednesdays. I will be posting these regular episodes of the Unfounded podcast. So I want to thank all of you that have been listening, following, watching, joining the podcast for the first time. I see all of you. I see how much the podcast is growing, and I genuinely, truly appreciate your support. Thank you for being a listener. And I encourage you to share the podcast with anybody you think would benefit from it. I know it has, it's a broad genre. The podcast can jump around a lot, so it's hard to know sometimes who would be on board with the spiritual side and the conspiratorial side, like we just went over today. But that being said, if somebody that you know is a very curious person, if there's somebody that likes to engage in these kind of topics, share it with them and see if they enjoy it. And also check me out on my social media platforms. Check me out on TikTok. Follow me there at Chris the Sage. If you want to be a part of those live channeled messages, just follow me on there and you can join in on the lives and be part of the conversation as well. I will keep you updated on anything else that changes. I've got some music and things that I'm working on that will be out here fairly soon. And I think that's all I have for today. Anyway, lots of love. Stay safe, stay happy. Don't get too depressed based on the things that we just talked about. Just know that it's more of an indication that we need to be tuned into our intuitive side so that we can tell what's true and what isn't. Anyway, lots of love.